Hello, I'm Dr. Robin Steedman. Thank you for watching my presentation on digital hustling in African cities, specifically focusing on fashion and film in Nairobi and Accra. This presentation builds on two studies. The first one is about film in Nairobi, and I've published these findings in my recent book, Creative Hustling: Women Making and Distributing Films from Nairobi, which is out this year with MIT. And the second study is based on recent fieldwork with fashion designers in Accra, Ghana. And in this fieldwork, I worked alongside other colleagues, Adjua Bobi, Tilda Langevang, and Rashida Rosario, to interview designers, seamstresses, and tailors working in Accra, Ghana. My study of Nairobian filmmakers is based on 8 months of fieldwork in Nairobi. So the first question we'll explore is, what is hustling? In my definition, hustling is entrepreneurially navigating precarity to build and sustain a business or career. And I think it's a useful lens for studying precarious work, such as that of the creative industries. And studies of cultural and creative industries have drawn essential critical attention to the inequalities and hardships of working in the creative industries. However, much of this research is so critical of working conditions and career chances in creative industries that it leaves little room for understanding how creatives, and particularly creative women, can find value in their professions. But it was overwhelmingly true in my research that they did find value in their professions, and their eyes were certainly wide open about the challenges and precarity they faced. So why hustling? Filmmakers and fashion designers working in Accra and Nairobi must hustle to keep going. And I think hustling is a framework that can help us understand creative work in places like Nairobi and Accra, and to understand the choices that creative workers make in these cities in their own terms. So increasingly, digital tools are part of their hustling strategies. And I think it's important to study digital strategies specifically, and I've done this in my own work, but it's perhaps more important to situate these digital strategies in a wider context. To my mind, that means locating them in specific city spaces, and that's something that I'll discuss for the rest of this paper. So what's filmmaking like in Nairobi? So in my work, I examine how gender and class status specifically shape patterns of work and success in the film industry in Nairobi. And I argue it's through different practices of hustling that women have created a vibrant industry despite the precarity they face, including things like limited state support and social respect for their work, and the prevalence of piracy. And the work of filmmakers is bound up with digital distribution platforms, which are global in scope, from Netflix to YouTube and to many more niche and genre-specific platforms. But this platform-related work is shaped by the city of Nairobi and the business models that are possible in this space. Nairobi-based female filmmakers approach the challenges facing them with an astonishing degree of flexibility and resourcefulness. They may move between producing high-quality television for cross-continental broadcasters, producing allotted festival films, working in extremely low-budget modes, and self-financing their creative projects, and sustaining their careers through commission of fiction and documentary work, alongside many other strategies. I think they've employed radical new models of working. So, for example, Appy Matiri's production company Zamarati produced 56 hour-long films for the South African pay TV company Mnet in a 5-month period from a single location. And this is how Appy described it. She said, "It was so crazy because all the interiors had to be in this house for the films so that we were able to work within the budget and within the time frame. We had to build sets here for all of them, so this room now could be a restaurant. In another half an hour you come back and it's a classroom, and the handymen are on standby waiting to paint," or whatever it was. It was crazy. So pretty radical, I would say, I think by any metric. And of course, not all of the projects that filmmakers in Nairobi undertook were successful, but the point was that these filmmakers are willing to undertake these experiments, and that their flexibility and entrepreneurship is a defining feature of their career biographies. Transnational connections were also important, shaping filmmaking careers in the city of Nairobi. So creatives must adapt. the artistic constraints posed by their working environments, and the ability to find financing is one such constraint. Ngendo Muki, famous for her short film Yellow Fever, of which a still is pictured here, is well aware of how her work fits within existing funding schemes, and she uses that knowledge to her own benefit. As she noted about her own work, in her words, "I can apply for grants because I know that some of what I want to do already fits into what people are interested in." So she elaborated, that she wants to do artsy work that's different. And this kind of agenda is one that requires international financial input and is facilitated by it. Of course, at the same time, making films, even with the backing of international partners, still requires hustling to complete them. Filmmakers have to do so many other activities than simply work on one film at a time. And it's for this reason that I think studying transnational connections requires a firm grounding in a specific space. And in this study, that's the space of Nairobi. Now let's turn to the fashion scene in Accra. There is a thriving fashion scene in Accra, Ghana, filled with fashion designers and seamstresses designing and creating clothing for local and international clients. In this context, custom-made clothing is much more popular than ready-to-wear, and it is typical for both men and women to have a designer or seamstress make their clothing. In our field work, we found that WhatsApp and Instagram were being used in important ways in Accra to find new clients, to maintain networks, to do digital fittings, and to sell garments, for example, but also that these digital strategies were deeply shaped by the city space of Accra. That is, these online practices were intensely localized in important ways. Let's now turn to some examples. For the first case of online sales via social media. So Miss D, a designer, made extensive use of social media to sell her clothing and had done so for more than a decade. She explained the digital nature of her work in the following words. Basically, the brand was made by Facebook. In 2018, I got my first physical shop, but even when you get the physical shop, you will be getting about 90% of your sales online because that's where people know you and it's seamless. So her large business was built entirely on Facebook and later Instagram, where she sold almost all of her clothing. However, despite this digital success, growing her business required opening a physical store because that was the only way to attract formal capital, which she needed to grow to meet her aspiration of growth. So let's also consider the example of Ato Teta, another designer based in Accra. So his brand, as you can see in this screenshot from his website, is a fashion-forward, street-style, ready-to-wear brand, and he was targeting a cosmopolitan client with his brand Atoteta. However, he also had another brand called Atoteta Classic, which made clothes that he described in his words as nice but not very fashion-forward. When asked why he had these two brands with such distinct aesthetics, he replied, "In Ghana, I mean, the bulk of the customers that we have here want clothes for like church, marriage ceremonies, weddings, or funerals, and they can't necessarily wear street style, so we serve that market." His passion and focus was on growing his street style brand, but making classic clothes was more lucrative. It was necessary if his vision of being a streetwear designer was going to come into fruition. But of course, if we look simply at his digital presence, his website, and so on, you would miss all of this classic clothing that he deliberately doesn't market in that way because he wants to maintain his aesthetic as a streetwear designer. So Miss D and Atoteta are but two examples demonstrating that online creative work is shaped by local forces, by the spaces in which these fashion designers operate. So in conclusion, I suggest across my work that hustling is born out of precarity, but is more than scrounging in the absence of better opportunities and cultural support. It's a creative practice in its own right and an innovative mode of working. So I think Dami-Yambo Adode, a filmmaker in Kenya, describes this very nicely when she said, "For me, hustling is good because you can't sit and wait for nothing. You have to go out, seek something out, build your own future, shape your own circumstances." So I think in the literature that creative workers are often theorized as trapped in a hopeless limbo of aspiration, chasing after cruel promises where a future of good work will never materialize. But my book and my other work on hustling offers a fundamentally different assessment of contemporary creative work. I suggest that hustlers are not hostages to the future. They build good lives and careers within precarity, and it is through focusing on the practice of hustling that this can become visible. And that is why I think it's a useful framework for studying creative work as it takes place in African cities and other places well beyond that. So thank you very much for watching my presentation. And if you're interested in reading any of my other work on hustling and the book that this presentation was based on in part, here is a list of references. Thank you very much and goodbye.